So every 4th of July, we go camping, or to the beach, or something to spend time vacationing with our family. Last year, we went to a beach about an hour from where we live, to spend the weekend. It was me, my husband, our 2 kids, my brother, his wife, their son, and my grandparents. We decided to go fishing one night, at a pier about 15 minutes from our hotel. The kids started to get tired and fussy, so I told everyone I'd take all the kids, and we could go watch DVDs in the car so that they could fish a bit longer. Now, I'm 25, but I'm built like the average 14-year-old. No exaggeration. I buy clothes from Abercrombie Kids. I'm also super paranoid, not only because someone could easily grab me, but also because I have children and watch the news too much. Also important, my husband is ex-military, and we live in the country. We have guns, including a small handgun that he leaves in the console of the car for me. Anyway, I'm in the driver's seat of our car, 3 kids in the back watching movies and dozing off. The pier we went to has a row of parking and moderate lighting. There were maybe 5 or 6 other cars there. There was an SUV parked on the passenger side. A small truck pulls up on the other side of the SUV, and 2 men get out of it. They go to the bed of the truck and start getting their gear, looking over at my car a few times in between getting their stuff. They would stare for a few seconds and get more stuff. Stare and get more stuff. It doesn't take me that long to get fishing gear and kids out of my car, so it made me uncomfortable how long they lingered. They finally go down to the pier to fish. My husband calls to check on me. I told him about my experience, and he reminded me about the gun. One in the chamber, safety on. So since I'm sitting in a parking lot at night, I decide to get the gun out and sit it within my reach. It wasn't 10 minutes later, creepy dudes come back to their truck. They had only been gone about 15 minutes, which is weird considering fishing takes a lot longer than that. They wouldn't have had time to even walk down the pier, set up, and cast out. At this point, I sit the gun in my lap. They're at their truck. They keep looking around the SUV that's parked in between us to look over at me. I look back. They do this a few times, talking to each other, all while looking around this SUV to look at me. I don't know if they're looking at me or my car, which isn't a high-end car, just a Jetta, but it was brand new, or if they were looking at my children in the back seats. I honestly don't even care. They were being sketchy. One of the men decided that he was going to walk to the back of the SUV and stand for a minute, just looking into my car. I looked at him, picked up the gun, waved and kinda half smiled, as if to say, "Hey, how are you? Leave me and my children the heck alone." The man said something to his buddy, got in their truck, and they left. I called my husband and told him it was time to get everyone together to leave. I don't know what the heck they were looking for, or what they wanted. Creeping on an armed and paranoid mother with her children in the car isn't the best thing to do late at night. A few years ago, while fishing with some friends at a well-frequented but poorly lit catfishing hotspot, our night out was totally ruined by some weirdo. I was a little bit tipsy, gathering firewood. My buddy was smoking a cigarette, watching the tips of our poles for a bite. The girls had just squatted to pee nearby, and we were enjoying our little campfire. By no coincidence, a strange man calmly and almost silently walked up to our group. He came from the pitch black, as if he'd been lurking or watching us from afar. His mannerisms were very deliberate, as if he were somehow in control of the situation. My buddy gave him the cold shoulder, but I tried making nervous small talk with the stranger. I assumed he was also a fisherman, looking for info on what was biting. No. He seemed totally indifferent to any talk about fishing, and he certainly didn't sense the emotional mood of the group toward him. The girls were definitely creeped out and nervous. At an awkward lull in the conversation, the stranger pulled out a large hunting knife and rubbed his thumb across the blade in a self-soothing way. I assumed maybe he was a lonely nom-vet, nothing more. Abruptly, my buddy started packing up all of our gear and turned ice cold. I remember the stranger getting a head start, leaving on foot somewhere ahead of us. I'll never forget the car ride home. My buddy and his wife explained that they had actually encountered that creep at the fishing spot before, shrugged him off with some disinterested small talk. And upon leaving for a short errand, they realized the creep followed them to the store and appeared in the aisle they were headed for. My buddy was visibly shaken up by this latest encounter. It put a damper on a favorite hangout of ours, and I'm pretty sure he followed us all home that night. I read people quite well, and there was a definite subtext to the uncanny conversation I had with this guy. Looking back, it seemed like he had something welling up inside of him that he was alluding to. Perhaps a bit of self-restraint toward us, but certainly not mercy or empathy. I followed his train of thought, and it seemed like he had an air of accomplishment and physical dominance over the group. There were some other highly specific circumstantial aspects of the encounter that lead me to believe this guy was a murderer. I don't want to get into specifics, but this guy was hands down the creepiest motherfucker I've ever met. There are several cold cases of dead or missing women within a 200-mile radius of this guy. He had all the cold mannerisms of a complete sociopath. After almost 10 years, I can't shake the feeling that if we met again, I'd be brutally murdered. When I went home for 3 weeks about a month and a half ago, my dad decided that we should do a bit of night fishing. I'm not a huge fan of night fishing, or any sort of fishing, or my dad for that matter. Our personalities are way too similar, and if you leave us together for more than an hour, there may be blood left over by the time he and I are done playing several dozen rounds of fisticuffs between the stubborn arguing and shouting. Anyways, Dad decided to take me to this river up by our new house that they just finished building. My mom and brother stayed behind as we traipsed through the dark woods. Now, my family lives in Oregon, and the river was about 1.5 miles from my family's property over massive fallen trees and stumps that I easily tripped on, not knowing the lay of the land. My dad merely scoffed at me and reminded me that city living makes you soft. He didn't say it just like that, but something along those lines, like some stereotypical cowboy out of an old Wild West film. I blame the fact that I didn't know the area as well as he did, and it just spiraled downhill from there, and arguing broke out between us, making the peaceful night loud and chaotic. We didn't stop arguing the entire way down to the river, my father critiquing my less-than-Christian lifestyle while I criticized his manner of parenting my 20-year-old autistic brother. When we got to the river, we finally settled into an awkward, tense silence as we got our gear out. I knew that this fight was far from over, as I sat down on a fallen stump and shivered my ass off. I had lived in a warm climate for over a year, and honestly, coming out here was probably him punishing me for even leaving the Pacific Northwest. We refused to talk to one another as our lights danced across the water when my dad suddenly stood up, his light landing on the other side of the river. There, on the other bank, stood a man looking right at us. He wore a bright orange t-shirt and a pair of scraggly jeans, but for the most part, looking pretty average, if you counted the machete hanging from his belt. My dad snapped at me to start packing all our stuff up, and so I followed his command as my dad started shouting at the man across the river. Their conversation was mostly lost to the roar of the white-capped water, but I could see the man making agitated sweeps with his hands every time I dared to peek. Their voices grew, and my fear grew with it. My father has never been one to carry protection in the woods, hence why I was born. This man was armed and possibly dangerous with that machete, and while we had the river between us, it was shallow and had plenty of places to cross, and even if it was snow runoff, I had no doubt this man could be behind us in mere minutes. Had we wandered onto his property by mistake and just not have known it? Drop the gear and let's go. My dad snarled at me as I took one last look up to see the man starting to walk into the water, his hand flitting against his weapon. My dad put a firm hand on my shoulder and led me back into the woods towards our house. My dad is an ultramarathoner. He runs like it's going out of style, and my mostly out-of-shape self probably wouldn't have kept up if I hadn't been so terrified. I couldn't hear if the man was coming after us, my heartbeat being so loud in my ears, but I followed my dad so closely I almost ran into him several times. Finally, we found our road and made a break for my parents' house. As soon as we were through the front door, my dad had the doors locked and was keeping a vigilant watch out the windows, making sure no crazy men with machetes were creeping up on our house. Finally, when he figured there were no guys wearing orange t-shirts, we sat down and began to talk about our experience with my mom. We avoided the part where we had been arguing, but told her everything else. We went to bed without apologizing, and I honestly felt horrid. The next day, with the only gun he owned, my father and I walked back out into the woods after calling the police. They said that there was a guy who did enjoy scaring people off of forest land in the area, and that we shouldn't be too concerned. Feeling a bit sheepish, we went back to the place where we had left our gear, both of us apologizing for our lackluster behavior the night before. When we returned to what we believed to be the spot, we saw that our fishing poles had been bent and all the line had been draped from tree to tree, and the tackle box was gone. However, me and my dad didn't fight again for the rest of my trip home. So this all starts when my two buddies, me 19 and them 20 and 17, and I went to fish off this bank on the river in the afternoon. The layout is that you drive over the levee before you drop down into a boat ramp and parking area right next to the river. We brought pizza, beer, weed, music, and of course our rods, hoping we'd just hang out and do some late-night fishing. At this point, we're all set up on the bank with our chairs and speaker, having a nice evening, and it's probably been 2 hours, and it's 9 p.m. now. All three of us were feeling good with some beers in our system, and then all of a sudden, we hear 2 cars with super loud music pull up, and everyone gets out. The cars must have had 4 to 5 people in each one, because I heard a lot of people talking, but it was all in Spanish, so I couldn't make anything out. We tried to ignore it, but then it gets so loud that we couldn't enjoy ourselves, so we start packing our stuff to head back to the car and just chill out while we sober up. While we're gathering our things, we start to hear what sounds like an argument going down. We start to hear lots of glass shattering and people screaming at the top of their lungs. They couldn't see us, but they were basically no more than 20 feet behind our heads. At this point, we're just keeping quiet, and then you start to hear what sounded like someone getting punched repeatedly, and then a loud splash into the river by the boat ramp and someone saying, "Nah, leave him," which were the only words spoken in English. At this point, we didn't know what we just heard happen, and we didn't want to stick around and find out. The 3 of us trekked back up the steep incline to get back to the car, but as soon as we came into their view, they all got back into the 2 cars and quickly sped back over the levee. Except, we spotted one of the cars just sitting on the top of the levee slowly creeping forward. When we turned our car on, that car then went fully over the levee. We realized we were the only car left in the parking lot, and it was now pitch black outside, around 9:30 p.m. We sat there for no more than 30 seconds, just trying to process what we just heard go down, and then we decided we needed to get out of there completely and park somewhere to sober up all the way. As we're going over the levee, the road goes over it, and then down, and makes a sharp left. Right after we take that sharp left, our hearts drop when we see 4 cars lined up completely horizontally across the road, blocking us from getting through. There are orchards on our left and right, so there was no going around at all. At this point, my buddy just gassed it straight towards their bumpers to try and split in between the cars and get out of there, even if it meant damaging the front end of his car. Just as we do that, one of the 4 cars slightly moved out of the way, creating a gap. We flew right through it and got out of there, and they were laying on the horn while we passed through. We don't know what their intentions were, but clearly there were 2 cars in the boat ramp area where we were at, and 2 cars on the other side of the levee blocking the road from anyone else coming in. I ended up filing a police report, just in case they really did dump a body into the river. It happens all the time here. But I haven't heard anything back. Definitely one of my most terrifying experiences.